Hello out there. I realized today that I had not yet made any videos about Benchmade knives. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to talk about some of my Benchmades. And I didn't necessarily want to do a review on any one knife or do any kind of comparison video. So instead, what I'm going to do is a review of the Lifesharp service. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about the Lifesharp service, my experience with it, give you the basics of it, and some of the details about how it all works, and give you my perception of how it is as a whole. Okay, so these 4 knives have all at some point in their lifetime been sent into Benchmade to get the Lifesharp service. A couple of them pretty recently, a couple of them not so recently. I've actually used the service a couple other times for knives that I no longer own. So I'm pretty experienced with it, and overall I've had really good experiences with Benchmade and their customer service. Okay, so the Lifesharp service, if you've never heard of it, is good for anyone who owns a Benchmade knife. You can send your knife in to Benchmade Knife Company, and they will sharpen the knife and clean it and replace any hardware that needs to be replaced and just make sure it is fully functional and good to go. Okay? If you have a broken blade on any of your knives, the last time I checked, it cost $25 to replace the blade. I'm not sure if that price is still accurate, and I'm not sure if all blades are available. Like this knife, the Colgera, which is discontinued. If this blade were to break, I'm not sure if I'd be able to get a replacement. That would just be, conditional to the availability of the product. Also, they will not sharpen serrations. So if you have a knife like this, when I send this in, they sharpened the plain edge right here, but they left the serrations dull, and I had to work on those myself when I got it back. This knife is actually an HK model. We'll talk more about it in a bit, but the point of mentioning that is that it's not just good for actual Benchmade knives, it's good for anything that Benchmade makes themselves. So the HK branded knives, the old like Lone Wolves or the Bone Collectors, I think the Harley Davidsons as well, those are all good. So you can send any of them in. So that's a nice aspect of it. Okay. So when you send in a knife to Lifesharp, obviously you have to pay for shipping, but just about everything else should be free. The return shipping is free. All of the labor and everything that is done to it is free. If you send in a knife, don't send it in its original box. You want to just wrap it up and send it in as is, because they won't send the original box back. They'll send it back in a box like this. It's a gray one. Looks very similar to the blue class and black class boxes, but again, it's gray, no labels. And in the box, you'll have your knife in a little plastic sleeve, and you'll have your service ticket. And it'll look something like this. All right, there's a lot of Sharpie on here. I've crossed out my name and information, but also the names of the employees that were working on the knife. Not sure if that matters, but just thought it was probably a good idea. So you can see on the left side here, you have the date. Over on the right side, the problem class. It was for sharpening, inspection, and cleaning. The date and time. This was early this year. Labor prices, absolutely free. You can see all the zeros. Then on the bottom, it'll say resolution. And that's where they sort of just give you all the details of what they did. So this knife is actually the HK up here that they're talking about, that they replaced the springs, the screws, cleaned, adjusted, oiled, sharpened as needed. Again, not the serrations. Okay? And sometimes I sort of feel like they do more than what they say they did, because this knife was used when I got it, and I sent it in. Oh, and let me interject real quickly and say that it's great if you bought a Benchmade brand new, either from the company themselves or from a licensed distributor and retailer. But the Lifesharp service has worked for me multiple times on knives that I got secondhand. So as long as it's a Benchmade and it's not a counterfeit, as far as I know, they'll honor the Lifesharp system. If it is a counterfeit though, and you send it in, they will most likely seize it. So don't do that. Make sure what you have is a genuine Benchmade, and then you won't have any problems. Okay, but this knife, this HK, as I was saying, I had gotten secondhand. I got it at a really good price, and it was extremely beat up when I got it. And so I sent it in, had them sharpen this D2 tool steel. Again, not the serrations. And they did an excellent job cleaning the knife also, to the point where I really think they might have completely changed out the liners, because there was a lot of rust on this knife. And the liners look brand new in there now, so I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, but the point is that it looks fantastic and came back in excellent shape. All right, the stripping of the blade, because this did have the black blade at one point, that was done by me after it came back from Lifesharp. So I didn't send it in like that. You know, I sent it in, it looked old and worn on the blade with that black coating coming off, but I did that work later on. The cool thing about it, though, is I requested, you know, in the paperwork when I sent it, I said don't replace the clip, because the clip was already really worn, and I knew I wanted to strip the clip as well, so I didn't want them putting a new clip on it that I would have to work on, and they didn't. They left it alone. So that's really cool, too. You can say, hey, do this, don't do this. They'll say, okay, and they'll take care of your knife the way you want them to take care of your knife, which is great. All right, one sort of small detractor about the whole service is that, you know, the knife didn't come back to me centered. A lot of them don't, and there's a good number of Benchmades that just aren't centered from the factory. So I'm not sure if this is a thing where they just don't prioritize this as a company, because you can tell, you know, when you get a knife back from the Lifesharp service, that they put a lot of time and effort into making it as good as they can. So the fact that it's not centered just really means to me that it's not a priority of theirs. As long as the blade's not rubbing, like, I don't think they have an issue with it. And that might be why there's so many knives that come from the factory not centered. You know, personally, I don't really care as long as it doesn't rub. You know, there's a certain small frustration when you pay as much money as you do for some of these knives and they're not as perfect as they should be in terms of fit and finish. But if everything else on the knife is on point, I'm not too worried about that. It's just something to note, because I know, you know, the two things that people really talk about Benchmades from the factory a lot is that they're not centered and that they're not as sharp as they should be sometimes. And I personally have never had a big issue with them not being sharp from factory. But the great thing about the Lifesharp service, though, is that this knife is going to be in one person's hands, and their job, you know, their one job is to take care of you specifically. So every single knife that I've sent into Lifesharp has come back remarkably sharp, and this plain edge portion is no exception. So that aspect of things is taken care of. But again, if you have a problem with the centering, just something to keep in mind. Lifesharp may or may not take care of that. Okay, I'm just going to move on and talk about some of the other things that have been done to these other knives. Real quickly, this knife is the Benchmade Volley. This one, they did a really great job replacing all the hardware. I've owned a couple volleys, and for some reason, I strip the hardware on it all the time. I don't know if it's the specific screws or the way they Loctite these smaller screws. I don't know. But if you've owned a volley or a barrage, it can be a little frustrating, because this the pivot screw is hidden under one of the scales. So in order to adjust the pivot screw, you have to take this top scale off. And that's where I always end up stripping one of these screws, and then I can't do that, can't adjust the pivot screw. It can be pretty frustrating. You can see all that up close. It's a really great knife. I love it. Just don't really understand that aspect of it and why that was necessary. But that's sort of just the way it is. And, you know, I sent this one in for the Lifesharp service. They replaced the screws and tightened it up for me, so I don't have to worry about that, and put a wicked, wicked edge on it. You know, but what happens with this knife and anything that I've seen with Axis Assist is the Axis Assist, I'm going to kick it real quick, flies out so strong with such a good kick that I think it just develops a little bit of side-to-side play after some time. And so when you strip those screws, you sort of hurt yourself because you're not able to adjust that back out. So they did a great job taking care of that for me. All right, these two knives down here, the Colgera and the Mini Griptilian, These are two of my most carried and most used knives in my entire collection. I carry this mini Griptilian all the time. I've sent it in for Lifesharp once, and I'll probably send it in at least, a couple more times over the course of the time that I own it, because it just doesn't make sense not to, And you can see all the wear on this knife on the clip, and you can see a lot of wear on the handle scales where it's been dropped and just put through the ringer a couple times. But the first time I sent this in, it came back and I thought they'd replace the scales because the scales are so clean. So they really put a lot of good time and effort into making this knife as close to 100% as possible. And I love that because I really love this knife. And then this one, like I said, is discontinued, but they did a really good job as well, just like cleaning and polishing. They changed some of the hardware out and gave me a new pocket clip. Again, I'm not sure if something were to happen with the blade, if they'd be able to replace that. Not sure about the availability of that anymore, but again, just a really good job with it. Made it really smooth. This one also, though, you can see not really centered, but again, this is an EDC. It's something I use all the time, so not really too concerned about it. Okay. So overall, my perception of the Lifesharp service is that it's just a great tool for you. If you're going to make an investment of $100 to $150 to $150 plus, couple $100 for a Benchmade knife, it's really comforting to know that you have this fallback plan where if something were to happen, or if you were just to use it hard the way that it's intended, they're going to take care of you and take care of the knife for you. The worst thing in the world is to buy a knife and not want to use it the way it's intended to be used. So the Lifesharp service sort of remedies that. It says, hey, you want to know what? Take your knife out, do the things you need to do with it, send it into us, and we will sharpen it and make sure it's clean and good to go. And again, they're going to make sure you have a very good tool on your hands for the duration. So I really like it. I'll be using it again in the future. So what's your experience with Lifesharp if you've used it? Let me know in the comments down below. Any other complaints, comments, suggestions, let me know that as well. But I appreciate you watching, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care.